Hi, I'm Amanda Madden with the Society for Italian Historical Studies, and today we are here with the winner of this year's prize in modern best article on modern Italian history, Gregory Milano. Welcome, Gregory. We're so
Thank
happy
you
to
so
have you.
much. Yes, I very much appreciate the work of the Society, and I really appreciate your time today.
Yeah, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, and it's a wonderful article. So I would like to hear more about it, as would our viewers. So my first question is, tell us a little bit about how this article fits into your larger body of work, like what you're working on now.
Yeah, totally. So first off, let me just begin by saying that that my article covers the fascist period in Italy. The fascist regime held power in Italy from 1922 through 1943. And my article in particular, my work, moreover, covers the period from 1935 through the fall of the regime in 1943. And I think this is important for a couple of different reasons. I think one of the reasons why it's important is that generally speaking, the literature on fascism has tended to focus more on the period in which fascism came to power, with a focus on really the early years of the fascist party taking power, and then thereafter the consolidation of the dictatorship in the mid to late 1920s. My article looks at the period really beginning with the invasion of Ethiopia and the aftermath, a period in which we might say fascism both consolidated its power at home against other challengers, against other dissident organizations such as the communists, and really began to fulfill, or let's say achieve its agenda abroad with the foundation of the empire in the late 1930s. Italy became involved in the Spanish Civil War as well at that time, and drew closer and closer to the Nazis as the 30s went on. So my work focuses on this latter period. And I think what's really fascinating about this period as well for me is that in just a couple of years from the heights of fascist power, 1938, 1939, within just a couple of years, the regime was basically in free fall, was disintegrating. And that's why for me this period is so fascinating, because we see fascism achieving its kind of its kind of maximal agenda, and then within a couple of years just collapsing. And my article traces this period, and does so in a way that moves from the heights of fascist power in Italy to, by the end of my piece, really we see the regime beginning to fall apart, based upon the experiences of everyday Italians. So that's one really important dimension of my piece. The and really what my work the work that I'm doing in this piece, but also my current project, moreover, is trying to show is that the fascist regime, particularly in this latter period of rule, was not merely seeking to control the population through threats of violence, through threats of punishment, but actually sought to move beyond that and sought to generate a new interiority within within fascist workers, in the case of this article, and within Italian society writ large, as I could talk about shortly. So in other words, that the regime was trying, I'm arguing here that the regime was trying to transform this interiority of the workers. And I think a question then is like, what subjectivity did the regime want to instill in its workers? And what I'm showing here with regard to the working class is that the fascists they generated a discourse in which forms of labor solidarity, forms of labor organizing would be replaced with what were considered to be traditional forms of labor attachments. So you have the regime, utilizing a discourse here of hierarchy of worker deference for management, largely premised around a family type relation. So in other words, instead of the management and workers appearing, structurally in opposition to one another within the division of labor, within a class-oriented society, the working class in Italy would be subservient to management structures within Italy, and I think it's important to recognize that Italy at this time was attempting to modernize, was attempting to compete, was attempting to become a great power, was attempting to compete with England, with Germany, with increasingly the United States by this time, and to really enter that upper echelon of states. And in order to accomplish that, Italy had to industrialize, Italy had to modernize, Italy had to develop its infrastructure, which required wage labor. So Italy needed wage labor. They needed a so-called, they needed so-called proletarian labor, but they did not want the politics of a quote unquote proletariat. They wanted to avoid the types of class-based politics that are typically associated with a society undergoing this type of economic transformation. So the last thing I'll just say quickly is that the piece itself, I think the way I've structured it is also, I think, is for me, was interesting in that it's responding to what I think people like Jeffrey Schnapp, people like Robert Paxton have talked about as kind of a shortcoming of it within the prior generation of cultural history. And I've structured the piece to move from the upper echelons, the highest reaches of intellectual production in fascist Italy, and to move from the upper reaches of intellectual production down to the wage laborers contesting or arguing about the cost of bread amidst the tightening rations for food during the Second World War. So it moves from from the fascist regime describing its kind of idealized sense of how the workers should relate to hierarchies of power, and moves slowly down during the course of the article toward what we might call the everyday. And through that journey, we see, on one hand, despite the attempts of the regime to claim that the workers would embody this new type of deferential subjectivity, that instead we see the workers engaging in forms of everyday, we might call resistance, kind of efforts at circumventing the rules. Maybe in one instance in my piece, we have a worker refusing to do the Roman salute and telling off a security guard. But ultimately, I maintain that the workers were so restricted in what they could do and how they could organize under fascism that the resistance could never reach a threshold under fascism of actually contesting the bases of fascist power. So what we have is kind of these kind of like petty forms of resistance, that lack any kind of organizational coherency. And all of this really, I'll just back to the larger project. This relates to my larger project, which my main interest in fascism is really as a form of identitarian politics. That fascism can be understood as a movement that posited identity, specifically cultural, increasingly by the late 30s, early 40s, a kind of ethno-racial identity that allowed it to make claims against modern capitalism. So we see in the fascist rhetoric a lot of claims about capitalism creating a homogeneity of culture, of society, making everything the same, making everything bland, and so what I'm maintaining is that these fascist ideologues are posing culture and cultural difference as a form of opposition against this specific feature of global capitalism, without actually ever undermining the logics of capitalism, right? So Italianist appears as concrete, as primordial, as traditional, posited against the dynamic of global capitalism. It's posited as a critique of global capitalism, while all along fascist Italy is maintaining, is society is being governed always by those same logics of capital accumulation.
Great. That's really, really fascinating stuff. And my next question is, I'd love to hear more about your sources, because the title of your piece, "The Class Without Consciousness: Fascism's New Worlds and the 1942 World's Fair in Rome," suggests you're working in some really interesting sources. So can you tell us more about? I know you talk about film, but can you tell us more about some of the other sources that you've been working in?
Yeah. So the main archive that was that exists today around the 1942 World's Fair, which was planned to be this 20th anniversary celebration of the March on Rome and fascism's claim to power in Italy, it's really a very in-depth archive, and in working through it and looking through the archive, I uncovered a lot of fascinating sources. This this screenplay by Comin, which was never made into a film, is really fascinating to work through, because the ways in which it directly points toward the ideal sense of, let's say, the ideal worker subjectivity that the regime wanted the laborers to hold. The other sources that I work through, which are fascinating, is just all of these visits by foreign dignitaries and even Italian dignitaries to examine the work site and the workers engaged in the production of this massive city for the World's Fair. And I also work through a lot of police archives, police documents, which are fascinating because the regime was not very interested in kind of like a lot of the everyday details of life. So this police archive is a way of gaining some access to the lives of people, to the lives of workers. We see in different periods, we see the police producing documents around what workers are doing on a day-to-day basis. How are the workers responding to this new food ration, which is limiting caloric intake to 1,000 calories per day? How are the workers responding? Well, let's send this police officer right to the mess hall and let's have him observe how the workers are responding to the decrease in available calories. So those are some of the really fascinating documents and sources that I use, and they're very rich. One of the things that I like about working with fascist sources is that they're very direct. There's in terms of what they mean, and that makes them really kind of weirdly, oddly enough, kind of enjoyable to work with. But yeah, so the sources within this archive are like I mentioned, they're really terrific.
No, all these sources sound great. So I'm gonna ask you the really controversial question now. I'm gonna ask you what the best gelateria is in Rome.
So so what I do with gelato is I always have one flavor that I try everywhere. It's kind of like with pizza. It's like I always have the margarita. It's just because that allows me, it establishes a basic framework, for assessing the quality across a variety of different shops. So with gelato, I always go for the nocciola. And
Same.
yeah, it's a safe bet. And in terms of like the actual shops, generally speaking, I look for the Sicilian gelato shops, which are, there's one in Monti that I was trying to remember the name. I think it's Glauco or something like that. But the Sicilian gelato shop in Monti is one I recommend. And also there are several around the Pantheon, which is like, hey, let's walk to the Pantheon and let's go have some gelato, right? It's like, what could be better? And there are several there that are very, very good. And one is it's Fiocco di Neve, which is pretty solid. But there are a couple of others right in that vicinity that are really good. So, but even more than gelato, I am big into espresso. So,
are we all?
yes. And actually and once again, for that, I love Napoli, the coffee culture there, the thick syrupy espresso with the lever machines and the really perpetually grumpy baristas. I think you can't go wrong.
Excellent. Well, now I'm hungry and wanting an espresso. So, Gregory, thanks so much for talking with us today. I really appreciate it. It was great to hear about your work, and
Yeah, thank you so much.
congratulations again.
Thank you. I really appreciate, and I just want to thank the committee and everyone involved with the Society for Italian Historical Studies. I really, really appreciate this recognition.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.